She was 4 minutes into her first morning in Shin Jae-won's study when he said her father's name. Not your father, not the man who passed. Her father's name. Kofi Osei. 2 words spoken without ceremony in that low, unhurried voice, and Amara felt the careful architecture she had spent the whole drive over constructing develop its first real crack. She had been awake since 4. She had braided her locks into a crown at 5:30, pressed the uniform Mrs. Yoon had laid out, black tailored slacks, a white blouse with a collar that sat exactly right, and been standing outside this door at 7:58 because her grandmother Amma had taught her that being late was a luxury that belonged to people who had options. She was not one of those people. She had never been one of those people, and she was not about to pretend otherwise in a dead woman's memory. She had not expected him to say her father's name. "How do you know that?" she said, and her voice came out exactly the way she needed it to. Flat, level, giving him nothing. Shin Jae-won looked at her from behind the mahogany desk the way he had been looking at her since she stepped through the door, with an attention so complete it felt anatomical, like he was reading something written beneath her skin. He was wearing a black turtleneck today, no jacket, and the absence of the suit somehow made him more formidable rather than less. His hands rested on the desk, perfectly still. "I know what his debts were," Jae-won said. "I know the sequence of decisions that produced them."
Your mother's treatments first. His own diagnosis. He borrowed from people he should never have borrowed from, and the debt transferred to you.
And then he got sick before he could repay it, and the debt transferred to you. "Stop," Amara said. He did not stop. "You have been paying $80 every 2 weeks for 22 months. The balance remaining as of this morning is $94,340. That is separate from the standard medical billing, which sits at $61,200. Collectively, you are carrying $155,540 that has nothing to do with my car." He paused. "I tell you this not as a threat, as an accounting." She had not known he had the exact numbers. She had not known anyone had the exact numbers except her and the man she paid them to, and knowing that Shin Jae-won had somehow obtained them felt like standing in a room and realizing all the walls had been glass the entire time. "I didn't agree to this arrangement so you could inventory my grief," she said. "No, you agreed because your other options were worse." He tilted his head slightly, and something in the angle, unhurried, precise, reminded her of the way a man counts cards. "You agreed because you are practical, Miss Osei. That is not a criticism. It is the only quality about your situation that I respect." The study was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves on 2 walls, texts in both English and Korean, a panoramic window behind him that looked over 22 acres she had walked through at 7:45, trying to calm herself down. The desk between them was old enough to have its own history, and on it, beside the laptop and the neat stack of folders, she noticed a silver picture frame sitting face down. She had noticed it when she walked in. She noticed everything. It was something her father had called a gift, and the West End made mandatory. 31 hours earlier, Amara had been running through her interview speech at every red light between her apartment and Buckhead. She had the whole thing memorized. She had typed 2 pages of research into her notes app the night before. Shin Holdings, real estate and hospitality. 5 years in Atlanta's market. CEO does not make public appearances, conducts business through a network of senior executives and contracts that were described in one article as ironclad and in another as unprecedented. She did not care about the adjectives. She cared about the entry-level administrative position that paid $44,000 a year. She cared about the number $44,000 the way someone in water cares about a ledge. Her Civic's AC had been dead since the previous August. The windows were down. Atlanta's summer settled into the car like it lived there. She made the left onto Peachtree with her eyes on the cracked phone screen and did not see the black Bugatti pulling out of the underground parking structure until the sound of crunching metal and shattering glass was already inside her chest. The front end of the Civic folded like paper. There were 4 seconds of absolute silence. She counted them. Then her hands found the door handle, and she was out on legs that were not entirely steady, staring at a car that absorbed light the way deep water absorbs sound, completely, without giving any of it back. Custom paint, black so saturated it looked like a decision, scratched back to silver along the driver's panel in a line about 14 inches long. She had totaled something that cost $9.2 million. She knew before he told her. The man who stepped out of the driver's side had the stillness of someone who had never needed to be loud. Over 6 feet, broad shoulders inside a charcoal suit that fit the way suits fit in magazines rather than in real life. His black hair was swept back from a face that would have been beautiful if beauty were the relevant concern, which it was not. He looked at her with dark, assessing eyes and said nothing for long enough that the silence became its own kind of pressure. "Amara Osei," she said, because she had learned before she was 11 that naming yourself first was a form of armor. "I did not see you pulling out. I take full responsibility for the damage." He said, "This car is custom built, 3 years to manufacture, $9.2 million. She said, "I make $2,300 a month." He said, "I know." Those 2 words landed differently than the number had. He knew her salary, not as a range or an estimate. He said it the way you say something you have already confirmed. Behind him, 3 men in dark suits held positions at the perimeter with the practiced spacing of people paid to keep specific distances. Amara had grown up 3 blocks from a neighborhood where men positioned themselves like that, and she recognized the geometry immediately. His name was Shin Jae-won. He told her this the way he told her the car's value, as orientation rather than introduction. He said she would report to an address in the most exclusive gated community in the state the following morning at 8. He said her salary of $10,000 per month would apply directly to the outstanding debt. He said his lawyers, if she chose otherwise, were exceptionally thorough. They would find every financial irregularity, every desperate shortcut, every $80 payment to a creditor she had never met in person. He said all of this in a tone that was almost gentle, which made it more frightening than volume would have. She took the card from his fingers, cream stock, heavy, embossed letters. Shin Jae-won, CEO, Shin Holdings. Below the address, smaller text, established in trust. She did not look up his legal team. She already knew she couldn't win. The Shin estate was not a house. It was a statement made in stone and glass and 22 acres of immaculate grounds. Modern, clean lines interrupted by traditional Korean architectural elements. The subtle curved roof lines and natural materials that communicated ancestry rather than decoration. Someone had built this to say something specific about permanence, and the message had been received. Mrs. Yoon opened the front door before Amara reached it. She was 63, silver-streaked hair in a precise bun, and she moved with the unhurried authority of a woman who had been managing difficult people in difficult circumstances for longer than Amara had been alive. She had worked for the Shin family for 28 years. She would tell Amara this twice in the first hour, not as a boast, but as context. "Your room is in the east wing, 3rd floor," Mrs. Yoon said, leading her through corridors that smelled faintly of jasmine and polished wood. "Mr. Shin's private quarters are in the west wing. You report to his study at 8 each morning." "What are my actual duties?" Amara asked. Mrs. Yoon paused at the base of the east staircase and turned with an expression that was neither warm nor cold, simply honest. "Mr. Shin works from home 3 days a week. When he's here, you manage his personal schedule, his meals, the maintenance of his study and private quarters. When he hosts, you assist with preparation." She looked at Amara directly. "The household runs on discretion, Miss Osei. What you see here does not leave here. Mr. Shin's associates are not all conventional businessmen." "I understand," Amara said. "I believe you do." Mrs. Yoon studied her for a moment. "You're from the West End. Born there, then you already know how to carry things quietly. Good. Her room was better than she had expected. Queen bed, sage and cream walls, a window above the private garden that she could already tell would turn gold at 6 in the evening. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the cream-colored business card on the nightstand. Established in trust. She turned it over. Nothing on the back. She was thinking about the silver picture frame face down at his desk. She was thinking about the 2 words, I know. 3 days into her employment, Amara found the photograph. She had been alone in the study for 11 minutes. Jae-won had stepped into the corridor to take a call, and she was completing the morning task of organizing the left side folders into the system Mrs. Yoon had outlined. She was precise about this. She touched only what she had been given permission to touch. She moved nothing she had not been instructed to move. The silver picture frame was face down. She had not been instructed to touch it. She touched it. It was a security camera still, black and white, grainy, the timestamp in the lower right corner reading 23:14, September 4th, 2016. A cemetery gate. A young man on the ground, bleeding, his arm at an angle that described real damage even through the low resolution. And crouched over him, wrapping something white around the wound with both hands, a girl. 17 years old, her locks shorter, wearing the white dress she had worn to her grandmother Amma's funeral that same afternoon, because the cemetery was the last place she had been before she walked home, and her grandmother had been the reason she was there. Her own face, 8 years younger, looking up slightly toward the gate, visible, in profile, unmistakable. She set the frame back, face down, with hands that were almost steady. She completed the filing. She was back at the correct position when Shin Jae-won returned. He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything about the photograph, but he had seen her hands, and she had seen him see them, and the space between them in that moment was not the space of an employer and an employee, or a creditor and a debtor. It was the space between 2 people who had been inside the same story for 8 years and were only now discovering that the other one was in it. If you're watching this from Lagos or London or Atlanta or Accra, if you've ever had to be the quietest, most alert person in a room while someone tried to take something from you, you already know what Amara does next. Tell us your city in the comments. Subscribe and stay, because what she is about to find in this house rewrites every assumption you've had since the first scene, and the woman who built the weapon is not who you think she is.
She met Madame Shin Kyung-hee on a Friday. She had not been warned. Mrs. Yoon had told her afterward, with the carefully controlled expression of someone who had learned which things to suppress, that Madame Shin's visits were rarely announced. She arrived at 11:40 in a vehicle that costs whatever cars cost when price has become irrelevant as a category. She was 61 and beautiful, in the architectural way of women who had spent decades curating themselves. Every choice of fabric, every inflection, every precisely deployed pause calibrated for specific effect. She wore a cream silk blouse and looked at Amara the way an appraiser examines an item of uncertain provenance.
"Oh," she said to Jae-won, smiling in a way that required him as its audience. "You've taken on a domestic arrangement. How resourceful."
"She's capable," Jae-won said. His voice was the flat, contained version, the one Amara had come to recognize as the voice he used when he was being careful.
Madame Shin turned the smile toward Amara. It was intact, complete, and for this version of it, she was the audience rather than the subject, which felt like a distinction worth noting. "You're the young woman who damaged the Bugatti."
"Yes, ma'am."
She set her handbag on the hallway table, on the exact surface where Mrs. Yoon kept the fresh-cut flowers from the garden. The bag covered them entirely. "And how long will this arrangement continue?"
"Until the debt is cleared," Amara said. "Of course," Madame Shin waved her hand with the lightness of someone dismissing arithmetic. "What is the figure?" Amara said nothing. Jae-won said nothing. "No matter." Madame Shin turned to her son. "Come, we have family matters to discuss." She did not look at Amara again as she moved toward the sitting room. At the doorway, Jae-won paused. His left hand lifted slightly, just an inch, the fingers opening once before closing, and then he was through the door. Amara stood in the corridor. The flowers were completely hidden beneath the handbag. She thought about moving it. She thought about the photograph in the silver frame, face down, kept for 8 years. She thought about "I know," delivered on a street in Buckhead like a statement of possession. She picked up her tablet and returned to work. She learned the architecture of the Shin family over the following weeks in pieces. 3 generations in real estate development. Jae-won's grandfather had built the first Shin property in Seoul in 1961, a commercial building on a street that was now worth 40 times its original value. The family had moved money to the United States 12 years ago, which was the diplomatic version of what Mrs. Yoon said quietly in the kitchen one morning when she believed Amara was out of earshot. They moved because Korea got complicated. Jae-won was the eldest son. In the Shin family, this was not a description, it was a complete job title. The weight of the family's name, its honor, its obligations across 3 generations, all of it sat on his shoulders by right of birth, undebated and non-negotiable. And Amara recognized the structure even though the cultural language was entirely different from her own. Her grandmother, Amma, had explained inheritance once as a river, not a choice. You don't decide whether you're in it, you decide whether you swim. Jae-won swam, but she could see sometimes in the way he sat in the study after his mother's phone calls, spine straight, hands flat on the desk, eyes on nothing, the specific quality of exhaustion that belongs to people carrying weight they were handed rather than chose. His younger brother arrived on a Tuesday. Shin Jae-min announced himself by laughing loudly in the entrance hall at something Mrs. Yoon had said, and the sound of it was so unexpected in that stone and glass and precision house that Amara paused on the east staircase just to locate it. He was 29, warmer in the face than his brother, with an ease that Jae-won either didn't possess or had never been permitted to develop. He called Amara by her actual name the moment they were introduced, and shook her hand with both of his. "You're the Amara," Jae-min said, grinning. "Hyung talks about you." "He doesn't," Jae-won said from the study doorway. "He mentions you frequently," Jae-min revised, still grinning, "for someone who allegedly destroyed his car, which, I should mention, has been fully repaired for 3 weeks. Amara looked at Shin Jae-won. He looked back at her. The corner of his jaw shifted once, tightening and releasing, and then he said, "The terms of the arrangement remain." "Why?" she said, not as a challenge, as a genuine question, because she had stopped pretending she didn't have genuine questions. He was quiet for a moment that lasted long enough to be a considered answer. "Because you are safer here than you are outside it." That sentence rearranged things. She had been recording for 6 weeks. Not everything, selectively. Her phone in the front pocket of her uniform, the microphone facing outward. Her father had kept a small recorder in his shirt pocket during the last 18 months of his life. When things get complicated, he had told her once, you want receipts. She had not understood then. She understood now with the full weight of being 25 and her grandmother's granddaughter and her father's daughter, which meant she was the woman who arrived at things after having already paid for the education. Madam Shin had visited 9 times in 6 weeks. 7 of those visits she had found Amara alone, in corridors, in the kitchen, in the garden once during her 30-minute evening break. Each time the same conversation in a different costume. How much longer did she intend to stay? What precisely was the nature of their arrangement with Jae-won? She was a capable young woman. This was always delivered with the smile that required an audience. Surely she could find another position that suited her better. The 9th visit, Madam Shin said, I can make the debt disappear. Today, all of it. Amara had said, why would you do that? Madam Shin had said, because I think you are a practical woman who understands the value of clean separations. Amara had said nothing. She had kept her expression at exactly neutral and her phone in her front pocket with the microphone facing outward. What she had also found in the 3rd week, in the secondary office on the 2nd floor, where Jae-min's filing system was closer to archaeology than organization, she had been asked to bring it into order, was a folder with her name on it. Not Amara Osei, the accident, Amara Osei, the person. 8 years of careful documentation, every address she had lived at since she was 17, her academic records, her father's name, his illness, the deaths, the sequence of it. Her grandmother's death, September 4th, 2016, Westview Cemetery, Atlanta, and a record, 3 pages, of a loan made under informal terms to a man named Baek-sung Woo who worked within the Shin network in 2019 to cover medical costs for a family member, because her father had known someone who knew someone, which was the West End's version of a credit system. and the transfer of that loan's balance to Amara upon his death in 2022 through no legal mechanism she had ever been told existed. Her debt was not from the car. Her debt was 8 years old. It predated the accident by 8 years, and it had been managed quietly within the Shin network. And it had come to sit on her shoulders through a channel that her father had never disclosed because he believed it was his to carry, which was exactly who her father was, down to the last detail of him. She photographed every page over 6 careful evenings. Then she called the attorney she had been speaking to for 5 weeks. The meeting happened on a Wednesday morning. Madam Shin called it, which told Amara everything about who had decided things had reached a resolution point. She arrived at 9, with 2 men Amara had not seen before, and a lawyer whose name appeared on 3 of the documents Amara had photographed. They gathered in the main sitting room, Jae-won at the head, Madam Shin to his right. Amara was not supposed to be present. She walked in and sat down across from the lawyer and set her phone on the table between them, screen down. Madam Shin looked at her son. Jae-won looked at Amara. Jae-min, who she had not known would be there, was visible through the sitting room doorway, standing in the corridor with his arms crossed, saying nothing. "I have 9 recordings," Amara said. She did not raise her voice. She had spent 2 weeks thinking about what texture to give this moment, and she had decided the texture was fact, not performance, not anger, though she had enough of it, just permanent, unchallengeable fact delivered at the moment it became permanently true. 7 conversations and 2 phone calls transmitted through the household speaker system on the 2nd floor, whose range extends approximately 12 feet past the boundary Mrs. Yoon showed me on my first day. She looked at the lawyer. The recordings include 3 explicit offers to pay my debt in exchange for my departure, which constitutes an acknowledgement that the debt exists as leverage rather than as legal recovery. They also include a conversation from March 14th in which the informal transfer mechanism, the way personal debts move to dependents in the Shin extended network, is described in operational terms. That mechanism is not a legal instrument. It is a practice. My attorney has reviewed it. She paused. I have also documented the origin of the debt through records in this house that place its creation in 2019 through informal terms with no disclosure to my father of the transfer clause and no written agreement of any kind. The transfer to me is not legally enforceable. It never was. My attorney has been aware of this for 5 weeks. The room was completely silent. Madam Shin's expression did not move, but something shifted behind her eyes. A fraction of a second, barely present and then gone, the micro-expression of a woman revising her calculations in real time, which was more frightening than any outward reaction would have been because it confirmed that the calculations had always been running. Jae-won's hands were flat on the table. His jaw had shifted once and then gone still. He was looking at Amara with the specific quality of stillness that was not blankness. She had learned the difference. That was a man feeling something with enough force that movement had stopped being available to him. "You have been building this since you arrived," Madam Shin said. Her voice was even, which cost her something. Amara could see that it cost her something. Amara said, "My father taught me to keep receipts." "The debt," Jae-won said, "is cleared as of this morning." He looked at his mother, not with anger, with something older than anger. The expression of a son who has been watching a thing build for a long time and has chosen his moment. "The collection practice is over. If I find it operating under any configuration after today, I will give every document in this house to the relevant authorities myself." His voice was flat and certain and final in the way that certain things are final. Madam Shin stood. She smoothed her cream silk blouse. She lifted her handbag from the side table, and underneath it, Mrs. Yoon's garden flowers, slightly pressed but intact. She did not look at Amara again as she left. The lawyer followed. Amara picked up her phone from the table. Her hands were completely steady. Jae-won said her name, not Miss Osei, Amara, spoken quietly into the space the room had become. She looked at him. He opened the desk drawer he had never opened in front of her and set the silver picture frame on the table between them, face up. September 4th, 2016, 11:14 p.m., the timestamp in the lower right corner. Cemetery Gates, Westview, Atlanta. A young man bleeding on the ground, his arm at an angle that described real damage. A girl with shorter locks and a white funeral dress crouched over him, wrapping something around the wound with both hands, something white, something that had belonged to her grandmother as recently as that afternoon, because she had been walking home from the burial and she had seen a person bleeding and she had stopped, which was simply who she was, which was all it had ever been. "I looked for you for 3 years," Jae-won said. She looked at the photograph, then at him, then at the photograph again. "Why didn't you just tell me?" she said. "Because you don't trust people who come with gratitude." He said this quietly, without defense. "You trust people who earn it. So I tried to earn it." Jae-min appeared in the doorway. He was not grinning for once. He looked at his brother with an expression that had weight in it, and then he looked at Amara, and he said in Korean something she did not understand. Jae-won's response was 2 words. Jae-min nodded once and left. She was alone with Shin Jae-won and the photograph and the particular quality of silence that follows the moment everything has finally stopped pretending to be something other than what it is. She left the estate on a Saturday. Mrs. Yoon walked her to the gate and held her hands for a moment without saying anything, which was the most Mrs. Yoon had ever offered, and Amara received it as everything.
The debt was gone. Both of them. The informal one her father had carried and the one attached to the car, cleared through the legal process her attorney had completed in 48 hours once the documentation was in her hands. The $155,540, not forgiven, not as charity, dissolved as illegitimate, which was different in a way that mattered more than the money did. Her father had not left her a debt. He had left her a name and a practice and a river, and the knowledge that flowers left on a stranger's grave were never wasted. She stood at the gate for a moment. Behind her, the stone and the glass and the curved roof lines, 22 acres that had felt like a trap and turned out to be something that did not have a clean word yet, something she was still in the process of understanding. Her phone buzzed, a message from the number she had saved under a single letter, J, because it had felt like someone who might need reaching sometime, and she had been right about that from the beginning. The message read, "The administrative position, Shin Holdings, $44,000 to start." The role was posted the day before the accident. It was the job she had been driving to when she destroyed his car. She stood at the gate in the Saturday morning light, Amara Osei, 25 years old, born in the West End of Atlanta, grandmother of a woman named Amara, who had told her once that the things you give away without counting are always the things that come back. And she smiled, not at the offer, at the fact that it had always, from the very first night, been pointing here.